Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Angela Brennan and today I'm bringing you Spellbinders Clubkits September 2025, the stitching die of the month, stitched pumpkin tops. Here are all the dies that form that particular stitching die of the month, and you see it's got quite a few different panels that you need to combine together, especially when you do the pumpkin tops. I use the best ever craft tape to adhere the pumpkin top that will die cut the detail as well as the overall outline of that pumpkin. So you put them together and you get the stitching die. All the stitch holes will be die cut when I die cut the pumpkin itself. So that is the main element that I will be stitching. So I'm very carefully putting together the elements, the outline and the detail to form the stitching die. And before I do any die cutting, I'm going to use the Lindy's magical powders to create some autumnal colors. So it's named Autumn Leaves, these 5 colors. And I'm putting some gloves on because they do stain and I'm going out for dinner later on. So I do want to keep my fingers quite pristine without too much color on it. So I'm using lots of watercolor paper and I'm going to be getting these colors here. So you've got very autumnal colors, red, teals, browns, greens, and a lighter yellowish green. So I take all the colors out. Now these powders, when you open them, they don't quite look like the color they're going to be, but the tops of those little containers are quite representative of the colors that you will get. I'm going to spray quite liberally some water onto the watercolor paper. So the reason I use watercolor paper is because there's lots of water involved in this process. And I'm going to use a fan brush and just sprinkle and just look at the beautiful results you'll get. You can almost see it kind of blooming, the colors blooming on the surface of that watered watercolor paper there. I'm just putting quite a few different colors, mixing them together, and I go nuts with the water. And I do loads of panels like this because I kind of use them throughout the rest of the club kits, most of them. I just think it just adds to those colors. So especially when you got your large die of the month, small die of the month, all of them, they come in really handy using these colors. In fact, after doing all of them, I still have got quite a bit of balance left. So I'll be using it at later cards if I want, because there's loads left over. And that's the thing about all these club kits. All your leftover paper is what you can use. You can just leave it like that. But I tend to do a little, I should have left some of it. Sometimes I kind of overwork it. I need to know when to stop. So I just continue playing with it. And then all that balanced color on that glass mat, I just pick it up with another watercolor paper. I end up doing about, I think about 8 to 10 panels. I end up doing with constantly spraying lots of colors. And I show you quite a bit here because I want to show you all the different colors I use, but also the different color combinations. And I tend to get my fingers involved, well, my gloved fingers, if you like, involved as well. And these colors, they do stain. They do stain your clothes, they do stain your fingers. So if you, usually I'm not really bothered about my fingers, but once I didn't really think about it. And then when I went out for dinner, I had colors all over and it didn't really look nice. It looked like I forgot to wash my hands or something. So if I'm going to go out, I tend to protect my hands, but I try to use something to protect your clothes as well because they do stain your clothes. I'm just spraying quite liberally using the edge of the brush to keep the paper quite flat. If not, the water will just flow through to the sides. And I just go ahead and some of them, because I want the color to remain because it keeps running. If not, I do use my heat tool, which I should have covered with some plastic because I end up having to clean my heat tool quite a bit later on because I've got colors all over it. This is basically the colors from the Lindy's magical powder. I end up doing loads and loads of panels, but I do create a bit of a mess with my heat tool. I love to see how the colors kind of mix up when you see that leaves with the various colors, and there's so many panels left over for me to use later on in my subsequent videos. Here are the die cuts. I'm just going to poke the little stitch holes out and I'm going to start stitching shortly. I end up making many more pumpkin tops than what you see here. I use a tapestry needle size 24 from DMC and I'm using their Essential Holiday Diamond metallic thread for this particular. I use actually various colored threads from their metallic thread set. Either this essential holiday or the other one, which has got the silver and green. I think so. I'll put in it's all in the link below. So I'm going to adhere the thread, the start of the thread at the back of the die cut with a little bit of sellotape, just a tiny piece, just to anchor it. And when you do start stitching, remember, because they're metallic threads, you need to use your thumb and hold the thread tautly, because if you don't, it moves and it gets too loose and you can't see the pretty picture that these threads will form. So you do want to make sure you hold it really taut, and that takes a little bit of practice. If you're new to stitching, I would go with that 6-strand DMC cotton thread where you would use only 3 strands, and when you do remove the strands, do remove them one by one so your thread does not knot. So these are things I mention all the time. And I did think I wanted to use a cotton thread for one of these, but I just think with the shine of all on that base from that Lindy's magical powders, I just wanted to stick with that and use some metallic thread, because I do like the shine that comes through with that as well. So you don't want your thread to be too thick, therefore you don't use a 6-strand. You either use a thin metallic thread like this or single threads. You've got your perla cotton that is single as well, so that will go in handy here as well. So you've got various threads that you can use. So you can see here, you just follow the edge lines on the die cut. And that's the thing about Spellbinders Club Kits, and I'm not talking just about the stitching die. All of their dies, they've got beautiful edge lines on it, which is such a great guide to doing your stitching. So here that I'm almost finished here, you can see how pretty that looks, and all you need is a little bit of a center and you could have made a beautiful flower. I'm annoyed I didn't think about it. Only when I'm doing this video I'm thinking about it. Sometimes you're so focused on all the elements in the die set you don't really think about it, but I wanted to stick with the autumnal theme of pumpkins and all of that goes with it. So I end the thread at the back by putting another sellotape, and there you go, the first bit is already done. So it does take a little bit of time. So all you need to do is do all your die cuts, put it all in a box, and sit in front of the telly, catch up one of your favorite programs, and stitch away. And I've done all of this. Here I'm just adhering the nuts that come with the die set, and I'm going on to start doing the background using the 2D embossing folder of the month, Autumn Breeze. Before I put that in, I'm going to do some ink blending, and I'm using my ink blending tags. I've got that in a separate video and I'll show you that. And I've got the distress inks I use at the back of the tag, so it tells me what it's going to look like. So I'm just going to apply my ink blending as I usually do, using my domed foam, my juicy ink pads, and the Strathmore Bristol card, which is great for ink blending. And I ink blend as usual, and then I make sure I have that ready. I'll spritz some water behind the ink blended card panel before I put it into the 2D embossing folder. Now the 2D embossing folder sandwich and the 3D embossing folder sandwich is different, so please follow your manufacturer's guide for your embossing machine before you put that in. You don't want to break your machine. So this is a 2D embossing folder. I follow the guide of the Gemini machine, and I put a heavy object on it to let the panel dry in the embossing folder, so it dries nice and straight, so it's not warped. You don't want that water to warp it. And there you go, you get a lovely image of the impression from the embossing folder. That's really, really pretty. I always make the embossing panel bigger than what I want to put on the front of my card, because it's easier to adhere it. Here I'm picking which pumpkin top I want to put, and I think I'm going to go for that lighter, paler greenish pink color, so I think coordinates better. This is an A6 card which measures 14.8 centimeters by 10.5 centimeters. It's a common and easily obtainable card size in the UK, which is why I end up using it rather than the A2 card size, which is more common in the US. I'm using a large scissors and just cutting all that excess off the edge, and then I've got a nice flush embossed panel on the front of my A6 card, ready to decorate. Before I adhered the die cuts of the pumpkin tops, I used the same colors that I used earlier, but this time I'm just using it very lightly just to capture the raised parts of the embossing image. So it just adds a little bit of a darker shade of the same color, and I do that with all the various colors that I use for that background. I just think it adds a little bit extra because it brings out the image a little bit more boldly. It just shows it off. And because I'm using pale colors, I don't think it takes over the card. I think it's okay. Maybe I could have stopped a little bit less with the blues and the greens, but the pink, I really like how it turned out. But I did go on to make that, and I like the way it turned out, that background. And now I go ahead and adhere the pumpkin top die cuts with adhesive, double-sided adhesive, as well as some dimensional tape. I just overlap a couple of the pumpkins, and the smallest pumpkin top, I use it wholly with dimensional tape, just to give it a little bit of variation so it's not lying flat on the card. And then I use the sentiment. There's one sentiment that comes with this stitching die of the month. It's Hello Gorgeous, SNGOURD, gorgeous. It's quite a play on words on the word gourd. I think it's quite clever. So I add some of those really beautiful leaves with those autumnal colors at the edges of the pumpkin tops, and it's easy enough to add them. And I use my liquid glue. I've used this art glitter glue with the fine tip, stainless steel tip, that allows you to really focus where you want the glue to go on. And I use that to adhere all those various leaf die cuts onto the card front. Easy enough to do. Sometimes I think I could have put less and I get a bit carried away. And sometimes when you die cut too much and you have so much available, you want to put a lot on your card. And I need to know when to stop. I hope I've stopped right on time here. And I do adhere one of those nuts with a little bit of a dimensional tape just to give it a little bit of variation. And I die cut the sentiment with some rose gold metallic card, because I think that pinkishness of that rose gold goes with that theme of that background, as well as those tops on top of the pumpkin. At least I think so. And when the Hello P, which is quite a thin die, when I do dies like that, I tend to want to give it another layer, so double the thickness of that particular sentiment by die cutting the word hello again, and I will just put it on the adhere it to the back of it again using liquid glue, so it's nice and a little bit more sturdy. It's easy enough to do. Now the word gorgeous, I use 2 of those die cuts, adhere them together and cut it, and then I also will use the banner die to die cut another layer to put it at the back. After die cutting Hello Gorgeous in the metallic card, I don't like it, so I end up using a pinkish Hello and a white Gorgeous, and I use the banner to have a little bit of a black background. I just sometimes think, I always think everything should coordinate, but sometimes the sentiment should really be slightly different so it stands out in the card, and that's what I've done here. I think by using the pink or the rose gold metallic sentiment, it would have just blended too much in the background, and this way, using the lighter pink hello and the gorgeous in white, I think it allows the sentiment to stand out a bit, especially if I just put it amongst the darker background here. So I'm using a dimensional tape as well as double-sided adhesive, because the gorgeous is going to go on top of a die cut as well, and the hello is going to do the same. So I end up putting extra layers behind the HE, because that's going to go onto the card flat, but the LLO is going to go onto some die cuts. So again, all I'm doing here is just trying to make sure that the sentiment sits flat without dipping too much, because you want it to be on a level footing when you put it onto the card. So if it overlaps with some of the die cuts, you need to compensate for the depth or the height of that sentiment that you need to put on. And that's all I'm doing here by doing some additional die cuts. And that's why I like to have these sentiments come with die cuts, so it's nice and easy to put some dimension on it. Let me know what you think of this card. I did think I did put in quite a bit of elements in this card. I could have kept it simpler, but I do like how it turned out, and I do like the color combo. Happy to hear what you think, and always happy to get feedback, constructive feedback from all of you who end up catching this video. Of all the Spellbinders Club kits, I must say the stitching die of the month is always my favorite, and sometimes I like it when it comes as a background, and sometimes I do like it when it comes as elements like this as well. So I might later on use this to make some flowers as well in a later video at some point, or combine it with something else. We'll see how it goes. Now here I used the 3D embossing folder Patchwork. Again, I've done some ink blending and I've just put it through the embossing machine, again using the sandwich that is appropriate for a 3D embossing folder. And the same thing, I let it sit under some heavy objects so it dries in the embossing folder, and therefore it'll dry nice and straight. This is colors that will go with this particular pumpkin tops, where I use the variegated thread. And again, I'm doing the same thing by adding some little additional color that will hit the raised parts of the embossed panel. And again, the embossed panel is bigger in the card front, and I do all the same things, and I'm going to just adhere those pumpkin tops. I do like the variegated threads that I used here because I think it looks really pretty, but I end up not using it for this card because I think these reddish orangey pumpkin tops go better. I'll show you where I use the variegated thread tops later on. I do show that in this video. There you go. I'm just putting the pumpkin tops at the top this time, and I'm going to use the Hello Gorgeous, the same thing, but I decided to use a teal colored ones, a bit more contrast if you like, that it kind of matches the tops of those pumpkins, which is a bit of a tealy green as well. So this one I'm keeping it really simple. I'm not adding any of those autumnal colored leaves because I thought let's give you a different option so you can keep it simple and it still look lovely, because the background and those stitched elements really give it enough of a pizzazz to make the card amazing. This card panel here, I've done some hot foiling with white hot foil using the Glimmer kit of the month, and I'm using the fall resist technique. I'll show you how I do hot foiling in my next video, where I do hot foiling with the Glimmer kit as well as the Better Press of the month. Here I'm definitely using that pumpkin tops with the variegated thread, and I'm using the colors that you see. It's a fall resist technique. Fall resist technique mainly is basically where you do the ink blending. The foiled areas will resist the ink. That's all it is. And I'm just using a damp chamois to just wipe off all that ink that is pooling onto those foiled areas. And I'm just doing some blending the color, the same colors, onto the sentiments Gorgeous and Hello, so that it kind of all blends together with that background. I just want it all to kind of match up, and I do want that sentiment to pop. And I've just moved that around, added some leaves. You don't want to see me do it all over again, but this is another composition that I put together just to give you a different view in the color combos. And here I'm going to use the leaves and a circle, no stitching, just to make a wreath card. I do like making wreath cards, especially with autumnal leaves, autumnal colors. Here I've removed the backing of the foam strip, and I'm going to put it around that circle because I do want the circle or the wreath base to be elevated or with a bit of a dimension on that card front, and then it's easy to be able to adhere all those colorful leaves that I've got there onto the top of the wreath. So it's nice and easy. I like the idea of wreaths. You can do this for autumnal leaves. You can even do it with the holly berry for Christmas cards. So this is one way of doing it. If you've got pine leaves and corns and, you know, that kind of pine cones and all from a Christmas themed card, you can do that as well. But I'm using all these autumnal leaves, and I'll also use some of those nuts there. So just for the front of that circle there, I'm just putting a lot of adhesive tape, double-sided adhesive tape, so it's easy to adhere those leaves. You can use liquid glue as well, but I just thought I'll try this and see how easy it is to adhere those little leaf die cuts, because the leaves are quite small, so I think those die cuts will come in really easy to add on to those adhesive circle. So there you go. I just go ahead and just combine the colors. Try not to put them too straight. A little bit of zigzag here and there. I do add the nuts with some dimensional tape or foam squares just to give it a little bit of dimension. and it's easy enough to put together, and I do like how it turned out. So if you've got lots of die cuts, if you've got the patience, you can make quite a few cards like this. In fact, I was thinking of using all the balance panels and doing this, but I ended up making just one card because I think all the other panels that I've used, that Lindy's magical powder, I'll probably use it on various other cards. It always comes in handy because all the Spellbinder sets got loads of die cuts, and you can always use them for those die cuts. And I do love how those colors kind of look very organic and mixed together. And there you go, you got your wreath done. And I do add a couple of additional nuts with dimensional tape or foam tape. And once I've done that, I use the sentiment that I hot foiled. Once I get the hot foil machine on, I just go ahead and do hot foiling with the Glimmer of the month as well as the Better Press of the month, and I get the sentiments all done. And this is done in a copper hot foil, and I use my trusty tea ruler to keep the sentiment nice and straight. And that's pretty much the card done. And I do like how this card turned out. I do love the colors. The colors really is gorgeous. And here all the cards that I've created. That background there is the Better Press of the Month hot foiled background. So I've used different backgrounds for all the cards. If you see, you've got the embossing folders, the Better Press of the Month, as well as the Glimmer of the Month, various different cards. And yeah, close-up pictures of all the cards. Thank you so much for stopping by. Happy crafting, and do catch my other videos for the Spellbinders Clubkits of September 2025, which is coming out soon, and I'll list them in the description below as and when they're available. Do leave me a comment, leave me a like, and let me know what you think of all the cards. Happy crafting. Until the next time.